Well, thank you for the introduction. I decided to take some notes during the presentations, and so I don't want to forget what I'm going to talk about, which is about 4 words. And it really is that we want to really emphasize that physiology is an intervening variable. So that when we talk about training compassion or doing any type of manipulation, a lot has to do with the existing physiological state the individual is in. And what I'm going to be talking about is physiological states lead to emergent properties, and some of those emergent properties are feelings of compassion and empathy. And just as Steve was saying, I'm going to be basically emphasizing that the physiological state that enables these emergent properties is actually a state of parasympathetic control mediated by a unique vagal pathway that is unique to mammals. And this vagal pathway can be accessed through certain types of voluntary behaviors, through spontaneous social interactions with the emergent properties of basically downregulating stress responses and facilitating health. So the actual theme of the talk is that we know a lot. We don't know it really from physiology, and we don't know it from psychology from our research, but we actually know it from ancient practice. And so the basic talk is really to say that embedded in religious and spiritual practices for hundreds of years have been manipulations of vagal pathways. We haven't called it manipulations of vagal pathways, we've called it religious rituals. These manipulations are really manipulations of vocalizations, breath, and posture. And each of these manipulations actually triggers a specific vagal pathway that is linked to downregulating defensiveness. And if we think about what is a major component of being in a state, being present and being mindful, it's really turning off defenses. We use the word being evaluative, but what we're really saying is we're not in a defensive state. And when we're not in a defensive state, we really are connected. And there's another component that I normally talk about, which is something I call connectedness as a biological imperative. Mammals, and especially mammals like us, cannot survive by ourselves. We can't regulate our physiology as an individual. We need other individuals, and perhaps some of us can even get along with another appropriate mammal, which may be your dog. But it may not be the best, but it certainly is good. Anyway, posture and basically these exercises of vocalization, breath, and posture are functionally neural exercises, and they exercise specific vagal pathways that are not merely promoting portals to compassion, but they're portals to health, growth, and restoration. And I think this was really the theme of Steve's talk as well. So we're going to start off with merely looking at some pictures. This talk is really quite visual. It's not really dense on the physiology. But the first thing is we have to look at the whole concepts of vocalizations and the fact that vocalizations have been part of religious practice, regardless of what the religion is. We also know that if you want to calm a baby, the singing of a mother's lullaby is very, very profound. Yet the voice of the father, which is less melodic but with lower frequencies, triggers in infants often a reaction of predator, which is really the impact of low frequency sounds. So many fathers are actually distanced by their kids who are frightened by them. And if you talk to parents of autistic children, they will tell you that their kid or their son is frightened by the father's voice. The fix for that is just to speak in a falsetto. So the issue is melodic voices trigger what I call feature detectors, or another word I use is neuroception, that trigger safety. So we can use this as in the sense of what was brought up earlier. It's not a learned behavior. Our nervous system is prepared to respond to these features if the features are presented in our environment. And actually religion has already understood this in terms of the types of songs and singing that's part of it. And again, if you look at the monk's mouth, you see the movement of the striated muscles of the face, and you can hear the words coming out. And the point that I also want to make at this point is that the neuroregulation of the face, the mouth, the oral area, the eyes, and even controlling muscles of the middle ear that enable us to hear human voice and dampen background sounds are related to the vagal regulation of our heart. So when we do these behaviors, when we sing, we're enhancing the regulation of our heart through this vagal pathway. And of course, it crosses religions. And we can now move to the second major neural exercise, and that is breath. And of course, within meditation, even the metaphors that we breathe in the suffering or pain and we exhale with love. Well, actually, what we really are doing is during the exhalation phase, the influence of the vagus on the heart is pronounced. And during the inhalation, it's turned off. So if we sing, we're always extending the duration of our exhalation. If we play wind instruments, we do this. And I often do a little experiment in my workshops. I have people inhale with a long inhalation and a short exhalation. I do this repeatedly without hyperventilation, and then I reverse it with rapid inhalations and slow exhalations. And then they are actually working in a dyad, and they have to report how they perceive the other person and how that person perceives them. And of course, about 80% of the people see a loving person across from them when they extend the exhalation. They say, I want to meet that person, I want to know that person better. But when they do the long inhalations, short exhalations, they look at the person, they say, did I do something wrong? Did I not follow the instructions correctly? So they have manipulated their physiological state by breathing. And of course, this is embedded in pranayama yoga, and we can see it also in the postures. And now we're going to get to the mechanisms underneath this in a moment. But in postures, of course, in Islamic, people are bowing. And of course, we create metaphors of exaltation and, in a sense, reverence. But I'm going to tell you that these things are more than that. They're actually physiological exercises. And this is from Islam. And this is Orthodox Judaism, which also has some of those same features of bending, bowing, and even in Christianity. And I used to have a picture behind this, but I realized this was a very respectful crowd, and it was of Tim Tebow, so who actually was going into the exact same posture. But now we want to decompose this and try to understand really what's going on. When we have this melodic, prosodic vocalizations that are conveying to the other person safety and calmness, like a mother's lullaby, this is actually a reflection of a neuroregulation through laryngeal nerves. And those laryngeal nerves are actually vagal nerves. And they are actually monitoring or basically manifesting the physiological state of the person vocalizing. So long before we had syntax or words, we had vocalizations. And the vocalizations served a functional adaptive purpose in the survival of mammals. They triggered in the other mammal that they were safe to come close to. So we now live in a world where we're dominated by syntax and meaning of word, including a lot of this research, the research going on compassion, when it's really not the words, it's really how the words are articulated and the prosodic features, because that's our biology. And our biology conveys the loving kindness of our speech, which is really the loving kindness of our body. And as we increase the duration of exhalation with vocalizations, we enhance the vagal break on the heart. We calm our body down, and we also downregulate those sympathetic defensiveness. We don't turn the sympathetic nervous system off. We utilize it for our benefit. We don't use it as a defense system. And breathing, of course, is the primary one that we can both voluntarily do and involuntarily do. And when we do it voluntarily, we actually do that manipulation of the vagus. We turn on and off the vagal brake. And posture is another critical one because posture changes the position of our blood pressure receptors, primarily the ones in our neck. And as we bow, we trigger physiological responses through a reflex called the baroreceptor reflex, which changes the vagal activity. Now, when we were in graduate school or college, we learned about the autonomic nervous system, and we tended to think of it solely as a system of paired antagonism. You have this wonderful parasympathetic nervous system that supports growth, health, and restoration, and you have the sympathetic, which is kind of this diabolical defense system. That conceptualization is not appropriate because the system doesn't react to the world as a paired antagonistic system. It actually reacts hierarchically. And what we needed to understand was that we didn't have one vagus. We had two different vagal circuits. We had one that was above the diaphragm, that dotted line, and that one included pathways that regulated vocalizations and regulated posture. And this was this beneficial one that downregulated sympathetic activity, but it's beneficial only in the context of safety, because if you downregulate your sympathetics in a dangerous situation, you're going to be injured. But what we forgot about was that the vagus was not a single pathway. It was a conduit with lots and lots of cables. And some of those cables were very, very old and went subdiaphragmatically. They went below the diaphragm and they controlled our gut. And this system was used by phylogenetically more primitive animals as a defense system. So if we look at reptiles, what's their defense? It's to immobilize. And what do reptiles do when they immobilize? They will defecate. They will reduce their metabolic demands. And what's one of the fear responses that humans have, especially in a function of trauma or severe isolation? They'll have gut issues. They'll defecate. They'll pass out. And some of the fibers that the reptiles had going to their heart still remain in the human. And those were fibers of this unmyelinated old vagus, which really slowed the heart rate up. So when a reptile was basically trying to immobilize, it stopped breathing, it lowered its heart rate, and it reduced its metabolic demands. And in fact, mammals do this as defense. So the vagus is not all a positive system for health, growth, and restoration. But you can see the pathways in the vagus that goes above the diaphragm that are involved in posture, vocalizations, and breathing. And this is a myelinated, uniquely mammalian vagus. But we have to remember that not all vagal pathways support social communication. They don't all downregulate stress responses of the sympathetic nervous system. They're not all indicators or support resilience and compassion. There are vagal pathways that are defensive and potentially lethal. So we have to be more specific in understanding what we're dealing with. But I don't want you to look at the cat. I want you to look at the mouse in the jaws of the cat. And you'll see that that mouse is limp. That mouse has basically passed out. We use the word death feigning, but it is not a voluntary behavior. It's an involuntary behavior because that mouse has detected through involuntary mechanisms or through mechanisms without awareness that this is an unavoidable life-threat situation. And so there's adaptive features. If that animal is going to be eaten, he's not going to feel the pain, and perhaps the animal will still survive because the cat will lose interest. But the main point here is that the vagus is not just a nerve of compassion and a portal for good things. It's also a nerve that has different adaptive functions and different pathways. So we need to think of the autonomic nervous system as a hierarchical system that reacts in a predictable way. And this is really this theory that I developed, which I call the polyvagal theory, to emphasize that there are more than one vagal pathway. And the theory describes three neural circuits that form a phylogenetically ordered response hierarchy. And breaking that down, it really means we use our newest circuits first, and when they don't help us, we use our oldest. And the newest one is really adapted to safety and social interaction. And when that doesn't work, then that's that new mammalian myelinated vagus. We then move into this sympathetic nervous system for defense. But if the defense of mobilization doesn't get us into a safe place, our nervous system may go into a life threat response like that mouse. And basically, you can see this hierarchical system, which could be described as polyvagal states, and actually defines the polyvagal theory, and that is this myelinated supradiaphragmatic vagus, which is above the diaphragm, is the one that's accessed through breath, through posture, and through vocalizations. And this has the ability to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, just like Steve was describing in his talk, to support our health, growth, and restoration. And when the sympathetic nervous system as a defense system doesn't really serve its purpose to put us in safety, then this shutdown response will occur. And what research is now showing that even markers for cancer or cancer stages, that if you have really a strong or well-functioning myelinated vagus, cancer stage is less predictive of outcome than if you have a low vagal regulation through the heart. And there's research even on prostate cancer now showing that the subdiaphragmatic autonomic neurons are embedded in actually the functioning and development of various aspects of cancer. So what we really want is this supradiaphragmatic vagus to work, to function, and this is how prayers and chants will work, to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, the HPA axis, to allow the subdiaphragmatic organs to be in balance now, subdiaphragmatically, using both sympathetic and parasympathetic systems to promote health, growth, and restoration. So if treated as a hierarchical system, Then vagal manipulations via prayer, meditation, and chants involving vocalizations, breath, and posture are both efficient and neurophysiologically sound strategies that are capable of turning off both sympathetic and vagal pathways of defense. Thank you.